If Saitama is anything, he's certainly memorable for one reason or another. Some people will remember him for his unrivaled strength. Some will remember him for his extraordinarily ordinary personality. Some will remember him for both of these reasons, some will remember him for other reasons, while you will remember this part of the video for going on the same bit for a little too long. Saitama's style of character, though, is certainly nothing new. I really wish I could describe him here, but there really is nothing special to describe about Saitama aside from being a bald one-tap extraordinaire. But I guess in some weird ways, nothing is something, which is exactly what Saitama helps accomplish in the context of One Punch Man. Usually, calling someone a two-dimensional character comes with a plethora of negative connotations, but Saitama manages to dodge all of this, and I contribute that to a single factor, that being the world building of One Punch Man. Yes, I do and will use words that seem to illustrate him as a poorly written character, but that's not because I believe that Saitama is one, but more a result of me not having any other words that I feel are appropriate to describe him. I do think contrasting powers that couldn't be described as anything less than absolutely insane with the personality that could be described as too many things less than absolutely insane can actually be a great match when done correctly, as is the case with our hairless and careless superhero. That's enough defending myself for now, so let's go back to what I was talking about, the world of One Punch Man. See, Saitama's character, or rather lack of, creates an interesting case where the world develops outside of Saitama, which then in return helps bolster him by giving us all of these other contrasting points. Saitama sees so little change throughout the course of Season 1 that the S in his name may as well stand for static. And I'm sure you've noticed that I specifically mentioned Season 1 in that last sentence, and that's because I'm only going to be covering that season in this video. Originally, I was going to cover both seasons, doing some experimental stuff here and there, but as I was writing out the Season 1 section of the script, I realized that trying to squeeze another season's worth of writing into this video would only make it take an even more unreasonable amount of delay thanks to my consistent inefficiency. Maybe I'll make a video on Season 2 in the future, but for now it's just going to be a fun little watch. Anyways, my main focus is going to be on how Saitama's simplicity as a character helps enhance the show's world, which then, in some cases, responds with an enhancement of its own to Saitama. There's two things we need to lay out as a baseline before we get into any extensive details. The first is, of course, our man Saitama himself, but the second is the fundamentals, the very basic layout of the One Punch Man world. Since talking about Saitama will inevitably lead into the over-analysis, let's first get the minimal amount of understanding of the world we'll need for the rest of the video to make even a modicum of sense. There's only one thing that is really important for this, and that's the hero association, and the concept of heroes in general within the context of the show. While the typical hero is someone that gets elevated to that status by the public and the media due to their valiant acts, here, being a hero is something anyone can be by simply registering with the association. Now, of course, since some heroes are greater than others, there is a class system within the association ranking all the way from C at the bottom to S at the top, with each individual hero being given a rank within these tiers, such as C class rank 1, S class rank 17, etc., and doing heroic things recognized by the association will push you up the rankings. If one becomes a hero and climbs into the upper classes of ANS, it's not uncommon for them to be recognized and treated like celebrities by the people, all while being paid. So now that we know what heroes are and how they function, let's hold tight to that piece of information as we now look at Saitama. All good heroes begin with an origin story, so we might as well start from there. It's told in the first episode that Saitama had wanted to become a hero ever since he was a kid, but it's also inferred that he never really did anything to become one, or at least until he was, not a kid. Once Saitama encounters and defeats a monster on the way home from a failed job interview, a fire ignites within him and he begins to diligently train to become the hero he always wanted to be, utilizing his infamous daily training routine. This gets him to the point we see him in the anime as the bald one-punch wonder. Now, becoming master of the one-hit KO came with its unfortunate downsides, that being the fact that Saitama is just too strong for anyone to really provide any meaningful resistance or threat to him. This results in Saitama getting extremely bored as a hero since every single fight is over within a matter of seconds with nothing noteworthy happening, and Saitama's rather dull personality doesn't add any flair to the matter either. All of this combines into the product that is Saitama's character, a very bored hero who constantly seeks a worthy opponent he'll probably never get. I know this whole rundown is nothing new for anyone that's seen the show for even an episode or two, but it is what it is. We'll be getting into the actually important bits of my argument now, so I guess there's that. It's time to tackle and figure out exactly what about Saitama enhances the world of One Punch Man. Something I mentioned at the very beginning of the video was the static nature of Saitama and the virtual lack of development he sees as a character. In Season 1, the only thing we can really say about him in terms of development is that A, he signs up to becoming a legit hero, and B, he is not pissed off by and quite likes Genos by the end. And both of these really actually have nothing to do with Saitama himself. The signing up part is nothing more than a little title tacked onto him, and the whole Genos thing is not so much about Saitama but more about Genos properly learning about and understanding who Saitama is. The fact that Saitama sees no meaningful changes to his character sounds really bad, but it isn't at the end of the day for two reasons. First, Saitama's character is very defined thanks to the nothing is something idea I mentioned earlier. His very one-dimensional approach to each and every situation puts him in a weird place where he becomes both unpredictable yet predictable. He's unpredictable because he doesn't react to things like every ordinary person or even some of the other heroes we see, but he's also predictable since he reacts to everything with the same monotonous mannerisms and wins every fight in the same way. This helps keep things interesting with him since it creates an odd dichotomy of consistency and variety as we see him interact with other heroes and a wide assortment of monsters. Secondly, Saitama is a character that requires little investment and time from the development perspective, leaving all of that time up for everyone else to take up. For as dumb as that second reason sounds, I really believe that to be the case. In essence, Saitama's overly simple character structure leads to a formula that produces consistent results. Everything we need to know about him is already written in stone with episode 1. We see him turn furious when he one-shots a villain. We see him just mindlessly grocery shopping. We see him even have an absolutely wild dream where he finally becomes excited for a fight, only for it to all dissipate when the real-life equivalent turns out to be a complete disappointment. And honestly, those three events pretty much sum up the entirety of Saitama's character, which I summarized earlier in the video as something along the lines of a hero who gets bored because he's too strong. Season 1 doesn't make any specific efforts to break away from this algorithm because it knows it doesn't need to. Yes, there are scenes in episodes such as 7 and 9 that challenge this, but those are more of a result of the world interacting with Saitama in ways to unveil previously irrelevant sides of him, rather than our hero seeing any major, long-lasting changes to his character, or at least that's how I view it. I'll eventually get to that and expand on what that means, so let's now instead get to the first half of my argument, the effect to which Saitama's characterization enables the world of One Punch Man to grow. Now, I've been saying world this and world that, but I should probably lay down a more concrete definition for this before diving into any serious details. For me, a world of a show, novel, video game, or just anything consists of two major variables, the setting and the cast. My main focus is going to be on the latter of the two, since One Punch Man has a lot of great non-Saitama characters that I really want to look at, and also because the setting of the show remains as the same cityscape for the most part. Earlier, I briefly mentioned my main reason behind how Saitama allows the One Punch Man world to expand and detail itself, that being Saitama doesn't need to be developed upon, so instead everyone else just does it for him. Now, I could try and sit here and keep explaining that one idea, but that would just result in me chasing my own tail and running around in circles for a while, and still only making one point during all of that. So, let's instead look at some examples that actively benefit from this idea. What these next couple examples will do is hopefully help illustrate these characters and portray their details in a way that constructs a platform on which I can elaborate on how the world returns to favor and strengthen Saitama's character. I recommend finding a way to settle in for a little while because I've got a few to get through. The first example here isn't going to be one that actively benefits Saitama in any way, but it'll be the only one in the video that'll be that way. This might be a bit of a surprise, but we're going to be looking at two characters for this one, Moomin Rider and Amai Mask. To go on a bit of a tangent, let me just put it out there that Moomin Rider is my favorite character in the entire show, at least during this time of having seen only season 1. I originally was going to make an entire video dedicated to him, but eventually decided against that and went with the more broad topic that you're listening to right now. Anyways, I realized that Moomin Rider and Amai Mask are a weird duo to pick, but there's a lot going on here that I want to explain. To begin, let us take a look at Moomin Rider. Moomin Rider has an insane amount of motivation rivaling that of your traditional superheroes, doing all that he needs to in the name of justice. Unfortunately, his powers are not so good, but at least he's got a cool bike. All of this is reflected clearly in his hero ranking, C-Class Rank 1. Let's put our courageous cyclist on hold for a moment and now go over to Amai Mask. Amai Mask is the Rank 1 A-Class hero, quite far away from where Moomin Rider is. Mask is, in a sense, the portrait of a perfect hero. He has the same basis of motivation that Moomin does, that being justice, but the main difference here is that Mask has the powers to effectively support it, giving him the rank that he currently possesses. By now, you can probably guess where and how I'm trying to tie together these two heroes, but I assure you there is more. Moomin and Mask represent two contrasting ends of a spectrum in more ways than just their rank and power, but defining said spectrum can be a little tricky and requires me to go a little more in depth with our two characters before I can properly title it. Let's begin with Moomin Rider. We don't get any really heavy scenes including him with the exception of one, but the small bits of him that we're given is more than enough to paint the kind of hero that Moomin Rider is. He isn't picky about his tasks. He'll do anything ranging from saving a cat from a tree to fighting immensely powerful sea monsters, all without hesitation. He's not a hero because he wants to eradicate evil, but rather because he just wants to help people. If I described Amai Mask as the portrait of a perfect hero, Moomin Rider would be one of a genuine hero. I mentioned what I called a heavy scene including Moomin Rider, but before we get to that, Amai Mask. Amai Mask doesn't really get a lot of meaningful time on screen either, but he, just like Moomin Rider, gets one really important scene that ends up defining his character in a massive way. Once the Space Invaders were defeated in episode 12, Amai Mask arrives to confront the S-Class heroes involved in the fight. Mask fails to see their efforts as he is blinded by the utter destruction of City A and instead berates the heroes as useless. When one of the heroes questions what side Mask stands on, he simply replies that he is on the side of justice. So, what does this all mean? It's all virtually the complete opposite of Moomin Rider. Amai Mask's priority is on acting, looking like, and being treated as the picture-perfect hero over indiscriminately being a hero. After all, he is a beloved celebrity amongst the citizens. The most important line through all of this is of course his statement about justice. This only stands out because it's made abundantly clear that he has a different definition of that word compared to his fellow heroes. While it's easy to define justice as doing the right thing, that alone is simply not enough for Mask, as it also needs to be done the right way. He doesn't care about the victory over the Space Invaders, but instead he cares about the cost associated with the victory far more greatly, since the damage done could potentially tarnish the reputation of heroes who are supposed to be, in his words, beautiful symbols of justice. Let's reel things back and now reintroduce Moomin Rider into the spotlight by taking a look at his big scene in episode 9. Here, the Deep Sea King is absolutely trashing heroes left and right, including two S-Class heroes in the form of Genos and Prisoner. And here comes Moomin Rider delivering a nasty blow that barely scratches the Sea King and proceeds to get his ass kicked. However, despite his futile attempts at fighting, Moomin displays a one-of-a-kind never say die attitude and refuses to stay down. This scene defines Moomin Rider's sense of justice as something along the lines of, it doesn't matter if it's pretty if it's the right thing. The most important line for Moomin Rider is his acknowledgement of his weakness. Both Moomin and Mask are rank 1s of their respective classes, but they refuse to move up for completely different reasons. Moomin stays as C-Class rank 1 because he doesn't believe himself to be worthy of anything above it and is perfectly fine with other heroes surpassing him. On the flip side, Mask refuses to move past A-Class rank 1 because he is a self-appointed gatekeeper for blocking heroes that he deems as undeserved of the S-Class title, all while being more than certain that his strength is above that of many other S-Class heroes. All of this from their status, strength, definitions of justice, explanation behind their ranks, and the reason why they are heroes puts them at the far ends of the spectrum that I'm sure you've already forgotten that I mentioned at the start. Moomin Rider and Amai Mask's basis of motivations tie them together into an interesting contrast in which one side represents the ideal actions of a hero, while the other represents the ideal image of a hero. In a weird way, if you were to somehow combine these two heroes, you could theoretically have the perfect hero that acts and looks like the best parts of Moomin Rider and Amai Mask. Moving on, let's now look at a couple of different villains we saw throughout the duration of Season 1. More specifically, I wanted to look at the ones that were featured for more than one episode, and more specifically from that, focusing down onto Deep Sea King and the Space Invaders. This does take out House of Evolution and Speedo Sound Sonic from the discussion despite being in the same category, but I'm fine with that. These two villains were introduced so early on in the show compared to the other two that it pretty much boils down to Saitama beats the shit out of them without giving them any real opportunities to interact with the world around them. Yes, Sonic gets a little more going for him eventually, but he doesn't quite fully help fill in the points that I want to make. So let's actually look at the baddies in question now. Sea King and the Space Invaders, led by Boros, are by far head and shoulders above any other villain we see in Season 1 in terms of threat. And sure, this is kind of an easy point to make, but I swear there's more I'll be elaborating on. Deep Sea King is able to handle a multitude of heroes ranging anywhere from C to S class, including our beloved blonde Borg, Genos. The Space Invaders took a considerably combined effort from several S-Class heroes not only to eliminate one of their strongest members, but also to bring down the spacecraft as a whole. I said earlier that the two villains we're looking over were quite a bit stronger compared to everyone else, and that accomplishes something important within the world of One Punch Man. Before them, we had a lot of what we could call throwaway villains, such as the Crab Guy and the Blue Guy, all of which become throwaways because of how quickly they get defeated by Saitama. Now, it should be said that because of how quick their defeat comes, it's technically hard to gauge exactly how much damage could have been done by these throwaway villains, but I won't be lingering on that as it's not very important. The sizable increase in challenges that Sea King and the Space Invaders provide puts into perspective two different things. The first of two things is the inherent limitations we see out of the strongest heroes. In both fights, as I mentioned earlier, we see various S-Class heroes, those who are supposed to be the strongest the association has to offer, noticeably struggle. This, in turn, creates a looming sense of the fact that the strongest of heroes are not as infallible as their titles make them seem, and that one day there may be a villain so strong that S-Class heroes just won't be enough to stop them. The second thing is more exclusive to the Space Invaders, but it's also not as doom and gloom as the first point. One scene in the Space Invaders fight unveils a very visible power scale between all of the heroes. To get a little algebraic, I guess, it would make sense that starting from the lowest C class to the highest S class, power growth should be linear and consistent, of course with the exception of Saitama casually chilling in B class. However, the scene where Tatsumaki's psychic power causes Tank Top Master's strength to look entirely irrelevant makes me question the idea of linear power growth, at least within the S-Class itself. Instead, the rate of power growth amongst S-Class heroes seems to be exponential. I know all of that just kind of sounds like nonsense because A, it kind of is, but B, it also really got me thinking about just how powerful those top 1, 2, 3 heroes are. We're super familiar with one S-Class hero in Genos who caps out at rank 16 by the end of Season 1, and I don't need to be the one telling you that he's very, very, very strong. By going further with the idea of exponential power growth amongst the heroes, it creates a picture where some of the uppermost heroes just seem unimaginably powerful, the most important one being the rank 1 hero Blast, the only S-Class hero we never see in Season 1. To complicate and tangle things up even further, think of this idea of power growth in conjunction with the first idea that I presented of the potential unbeatable foe. In a way, you can constantly bounce these two ideas off of one another to try and think of which one would eventually triumph, but that just straight up gives me a headache. I think the final point I'm trying to get across here with the whole villain thing is that it's rather reasonable to make the claim that villains in the One Punch Man universe have the potential to get completely out of control, but we also have heroes who can get just as overpowering and lead to scenarios that I can't even personally imagine. So, if the two big bad guys we highlighted ultimately act as a base point to help gauge the power of the heroes and villains within this world, we now have to think about exactly where Saitama lies within all of this mess. The very cut and dry answer would be on top. However, there are some specifics that need to be explained. In 99% of cases, sure, I think it's completely reasonable to say that Saitama is stronger, especially in the context of discussing villains, given that they're a more known quantity within Season 1. Saitama virtually one-shots every single one that we've seen, with the very minor exception of Boros, since Saitama didn't bother hitting at full force right away. I think the other heroes are a much more interesting comparison to pull, given that we don't know about them as much as we do the villains of Season 1. As a baseline, it should be safe to state that Saitama is stronger than every C, B, and A class hero, maybe with the exception of Amai Mask, since we know very little about his powers and strength besides the fact that it's a lot. We already know that he's stronger than some of the S-Class heroes, shown by the fact that he was able to swiftly take down Deep Seeking while other S-Class heroes noticeably struggled. Some is not all, however, which leaves some of the uppermost heroes as potentially stronger than Saitama. I'm personally someone who believes that a hero like Tatsumaki is greater than Saitama, at least within the boundaries of this season, given that she basically has the same visible track record as him. She one-taps the Ancient King, and while we only know like 30 seconds worth of stuff out of him, we can still assume that Ancient King was still quite strong, seeing as how he can just bust through entire mountains and shrug off missiles with ease. She also single-handedly takes down the entire spacecraft, so if you add that on top of the Ancient King kill, I think it easily matches Saitama's significant kills of Deep Seeking and Boros. The TLDR of this is that while villains are much easier to gauge in comparison to Saitama due to the fact that we know their powers more extensively, it's difficult to size them up against some of the highest ranked heroes because of their powers being an unknown quantity to us for the most part. So it leaves him in a place where he's safely in the 90th percentile, maybe even the 95th, but we, or at least I, can't just easily title him the strongest hero ever, because we don't have any idea on how strong the remaining 5 to 10% of heroes are. One last example, then we can all get back to our lives. We've talked about the heroes and we've talked about the villains, so all that remains is to talk about, well, everyone else. The way we're going to be approaching this is by looking at how the regular individuals in this world interact with our two aforementioned factions, both in positive and negative manners. There's 3 scenes that come together into this example. The first scene is one we've already talked about, that being Moomin Rider's standoff against Seeking. Moomin is basically getting everything kicked out of him, but from the cowering citizens comes the cheers of a small boy, which eventually motivates the entire stadium of people to stand behind and cheer for Moomin. This does one pretty obvious thing, that being the confirmation of love and support for the heroes by the regular people. That isn't necessarily something I really need to dive deep into, as it's something we've seen before in the show, albeit in relation to higher class heroes. The more interesting scenes that we want to break down are going to be the last 2, one each from episodes 7 and 9, starting with the latter. In episode 9, we get a flashback from Genos, one that takes us back to the immediate aftermath following Deep Sea King's defeat. Everyone is cheering for Saitama until one guy begins to express his skepticism, saying that Saitama only won against Sea King because the previous heroes softened him up in a sense. He continues to argue that in the end, all of the sacrifices made by the heroes, regardless of their class, don't matter since they ultimately weren't the ones to take out the Sea King, and that if a C-class hero was the one to score the kill, then maybe they weren't very good heroes to begin with. This scene is, in my opinion, probably one of the best in the entire show in terms of demonstrating world building, despite how annoying the guy's voice is. This scene brings up the idea that while heroes within One Punch Man are typically beloved and well-respected public symbols, there's those that look at them with a degree of skepticism. One source of this comes from the fact that the association exists to begin with. Heroes get paid, and if they aren't able to defeat powerful foes, well, they technically aren't doing their jobs or aren't qualified for it. This doesn't necessarily take into account that some heroes, such as On My Mask or Metal Knight, have intentions that come before heroism, but there's no way for the average guy to know that. Furthermore, the way that the guy consistently driving the point that Saitama is a C-class hero is evidence to support the fact that C-class heroes aren't treated as very special in this world. After all, C-class heroes are usually relegated to doing very menial things in terms of heroics and are forced to meet weekly quotas just to stay as a hero. So, despite most of the ordinary citizens that pop in and out of the show displaying much love and respect for the heroes, this moment of anti-hero sentiment plants a seed of the idea that, some of the people out there in this world only view the heroes as nothing more fancy than a government-paid employee. Last but not least, we have episode 7's scene to run down. This occurs right after Saitama destroys a meteor hurtling towards Z City, where the city is still unfortunately pretty wrecked due to the debris that falls. He gets confronted by Tank Top, Tiger, and Black Hole, who are C and B class heroes respectively. These two try and call him out and turn the public against him by blaming the destruction onto him, painting him as a guy remorselessly leeching off the deeds of S-class heroes. Of course, when they try to fight him, Saitama kicks their asses and business is as usual. Why is this important? Well, the tank top heroes are not particularly highly rated heroes, and at the time of this scene, Saitama is still only C-class. From the statement that Bang makes while he observes the whole situation from afar, we can infer that these two heroes have stagnated at their ranks, or at least are climbing very slowly. Therefore, when they notice rising competition in the form of the lowly ranked heroes skyrocketing through C-class, well, it's time to take action, I guess. So while their plan ultimately fell apart catastrophically, let us consider what would have happened if it did work out. Saitama gets publicly shamed out of being a hero, which eliminates competition for them, theoretically making their climb a little easier. Piggybacking off of that, they would have received public admiration, at least from the denizens of Z City, which the association could have taken note of and used as a platform to promote them up the ranks. While there's some links from this example to the previous one about anti-hero sentiment, that's not really the point of me bringing up this scene. No, what I want to talk about is something else, that being the motivation of heroes. While we went into the motivation a bit with Moon Rider and On My Mask earlier, that was a more focused look onto two similarly motivated characters. While yes, we're technically doing the same thing here with the two tank tops, it's motivation that stems from a different direction and one that isn't exclusive to them in a broader sense. While it may not have been their original motivation, it's pretty clear that the brothers' motivation currently is to climb the ranks as quickly as possible, since that translates into both more money and fame. In other words, their motivation is purely selfish. This is a rather stark turn from the traditionally altruistic motivation of heroes, but as I mentioned, there's other heroes that seem to have a similarly selfish standpoint. The one that stands out is another S-class hero in the form of Metal Knight, a hero whose main priority is to continually develop stronger weapons as a form of limit testing itself, as we see with the meteor and the wreckage of the alien ship. There's other heroes we've seen that makes it hard for me to believe that altruism was their reason for joining the association. Once again, Tatsumaki is the one that stands out to me louder than any of the other remaining S-class heroes in this regard, but since there was no background relevant to her revealed during Season 1, I won't go around trying to make bold statements in this aspect. The point here is that motivation amongst the heroes differs on a case-by-case basis, ranging anywhere on the spectrum from altruism to selfishness. The existence of this is actually very important in terms of painting the world, since it erases the assumption that all heroes under the association are the good guys and that there's likely a handful of them that simply are with the association because being a hero helps advance their ulterior motive in one way or another. Now, let's figure out how exactly Saitama finds a way to fit himself into this world-building puzzle. All we really need to look at is his reaction after the scene of episode 9. It's important to look at this reaction in specific because it stands in opposition to one of the scenes we covered today. In episode 9, while everyone is cheering for him and the one detractor argues otherwise, Saitama decides to simply pretend that his goal all along was to leech off of the hard work done by the heroes before him. I'm sure that sounds awfully familiar because after all, that was what the Tank Top brothers were trying to frame him as. The show doesn't give us any cut and dry statements as to why Saitama does this, but it's pretty obvious when you look at it, and that's because it's better for him to take the fall alone than for everyone else to take it and him just take home the glory alone. So, is this it? Is this finally the character development of Saitama that we've all been thirsting for this entire time? For me, I think of this as a result of circumstance more than anything. I don't think this side of Saitama is one that grew into him from what he's experienced throughout the show, but rather was one that revealed itself to the audience because of the situation he was put in. Now, with that said, one could then go ahead and question where this side of him was back when the Tank Top brothers were going after him, but once again, I think circumstance is key here. There are no other heroes around at this time whose reputation Saitama would potentially damage if he didn't pretend to be a leech, so therefore he has no reason to take any falls and can just stand up for himself, no problem. I personally think this adds a new layer onto Saitama's character in a way where, beneath his hilariously deadpan shell, there exists an individual who still values others even though it may result in self-degradation. So there you go, that's everything. Way at the start, I mentioned something along the lines of how I believed a story's world to be one made of two constituents, the setting and the cast. While I went into minimal detail in regards to the setting, mostly because it was just a standard metropolitan backdrop to me, I think everyone that isn't Saitama does a great job of breathing life into this world that I'm more than okay with the setting being pretty plain. In fact, I'm starting to see the ordinary setting as an active benefit since, similar to Saitama, it doesn't require any excess time or exposition to be introduced to the audience because it really doesn't need to be, which once again leaves everyone else to be continually fleshed out. And hey, there's many roads to success, so if the author chose to take one that veers off the beaten path but still reaches the same destination, that's all that matters to me. Since talking about Saitama will inevitably lead into overanalysis, let's first get the minimal amount of understanding. Let's first get the minimal amount of understanding of the world we'll need for the rest of the video to make even a... God damn. Let's first get the minimal amount of understanding of the world we'll need for the rest of the video to make even a